Good morning, everyone. We are here to begin the police contract labor negotiations. As is our practice, we like to start these meetings with everyone just introducing themselves. And then I think Adam's going to go over the ground rules just to make sure we're all on the same page, and we'll proceed from there. Just a reminder, these meetings are live streamed, which means you have to talk into the microphone and not just around it, but into it. So if I remind you to talk into the microphone, it's because no one can hear you. My name is Courtney Washburn. I am the Chief of Staff for the City of Boise.
Jamie Sullivan, City Attorney.
Biff Jones, Chief Administrative Officer for the Department of Finance and Administration.
Kyle Wills, Boise Police Union.
Denny Carter, Boise Police Union.
AJ Veens, Boise Police Union.
Kristen Holtz, HR Benefits Administrator.
Christine Smith, Compensation Analyst in HR.
Tammany Brooks, Deputy Chief for the Boise Police Department.
Adam Collier, outside legal counsel for the city. All right, so Denny, you and I have exchanged ground rules versions back and forth, and I think we've agreed on a final version. So maybe we can just briefly run through them, starting with the Roman number 1, the schedule of negotiations. We're obviously starting today. And, you know, if either party ends up needing to cancel or reschedule, we'll, the request will be made through each other.
And Adam, if I could stop you for just a minute, would it be possible to upload the ground rules to the shared file for ground rules so that we can all follow along?
Yeah, and we do need to actually print out the final version and sign them. So I think during a caucus, maybe we can print them and sign them, and then we'll upload them so that everyone has access to them.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, and I think we're fine with the location and the negotiating team members. We're fine with that. Negotiating procedures. I wanted to draw attention to D because I think there's a provision in the CLA that says all proposals will be exchanged by the conclusion of the second bargaining session. I think we've agreed on the third. And so are we agreeable with these ground rules rather than what the CLA says, or do you want to exchange all proposals by the end of the second?
We're agreeable to the third as long as the city is agreeable that when it comes to mediation, if it goes to the mediation, that it's going to be the third, that the 10 rules or the 10 proposals, et cetera.
Right.
So, per the CLA. So we're good if the city's good with using the third meeting instead of the second meeting.
Yes. On the verbatim notes, so we agreed that we would do have used the software that allows verbatim notes. In order to do that, just to make it clear that these are recorded meetings, they have to be recorded in order for those notes to be generated. And if they're recorded, the city's required to keep a copy of the recording for public record information. If someone makes a request, we would have to provide it. And so we just want to be clear about that. We're not, I think it's helpful for the parties to have the verbatim notes. It's helpful for our note taker particularly. But
yeah, we're in agreement to do that as long as the city is able to provide us with a copy of the recordings too. And
yes.
the notes.
And what we've typically done with Fire is we just upload the notes to the shared folder. And so both parties have access to that. Okay. One other thing on the ground rules say we'll exchange proposals in writing. The way we've been handling that with Fire is we're just putting them in the shared folder rather than printing a bunch of copies for everyone. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that works for us.
Okay. Okay. I think those are the items I just wanted to clarify. Are there any other comments or questions?
And one quick question to Adam. So there's a budget team member that wasn't available today. He's out of town, but plans to sit at the table in the future. Do the ground rules accommodate his presence as well?
Yes, and in fact, we don't specifically say who's going to be on the negotiating team.
That's great.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, so I will, I think during a break, we'll print out a copy of these for us to sign, and then we'll put them on the shared folder. And then as far as, it's my understanding under Idaho law that the city's only required to recognize and bargain with the fire union. My understanding, the city's has recognized the police union since the 1970s and has bargained with them, and we're willing to continue to do that for purposes of these negotiations. Did we have any other housekeeping stuff we needed to take care of? Okay. All right. So as far as how we start today, I don't know if you guys have proposals you want to share first, if you want us to share some of our proposals with you.
Yeah, we're pretty easy as far as who wants to go first. So we don't really care. We don't have a preference.
Should we go ahead and put some of ours, share some of our proposals?
I think last night we had put a copy of the CLA in the shared folder with some clarifying language. I guess we could start with that. If that works with you guys.
Yeah, that's amenable.
So do you guys have that document up? All right. So my thought is we would just go through and scroll down at the areas that are redlined. On the first page, we had just taken out the dates, obviously, because we don't know which dates to use yet at this point, whether we want to discuss or look at how long of a contract we would like to propose.
I think the union would be interested in a 2-year contract specifically because the financials down the road seem a little more shady as far as where the economy is going. And so we're kind of more leaning towards doing a 2-year and then possibly reevaluating based on the economics. We really don't want to commit to a 4-year, and based on the trends of inflation and stuff, we think it would be unfair for the city as a burden because we don't really know what those property assessments and the revenue is going to look like in 3 to 4 years. So our preference would be 2-year contract for this time. And then depending on how that plays out in the future, maybe going back to a 4-year, but we're open.
No, I think the city's in agreement with that as well. We were asking for a 2-year contract with fire, and I think it for the same reasons we would want a 2-year contract with police, both because of the uncertainty with the economy, and also I think it's helpful to negotiate both the contract and the police and the fire and police health trust at the same time, or approximately the same time. So I think a 2-year contract is in both of our best interest.
I'm just putting in document 2022 to 2024. Everyone sees that?
Yeah.
If everyone's agreeable to that, I can.
I'm having trouble pulling up the link. It doesn't want to access my link. Well, it is, but it just does not show. If you would resend that link to my email, for some reason it shows that it can't be displayed.
send that to me as well, because I'm looking at this from a different link. It's not the catching your changes.
And I think if we could redline the changes versus just making the changes so that we have a documentation of the modifications, that would be helpful.
Who else needed the link?
I found it. Is this the document we're looking at right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Tenny, I just resent it.
Thank you. I'll reopen it. Okay, we're up and running.
Okay. So did you see the change I made on page 1? Okay. Now I'm looking at this on a full screen, and at the bottom left, there's pages moving down to page 4 of 59. We have the dates redlined out on the date on which this agreement will be made. And obviously we'll leave that open until that date comes. On page 5, under the general provisions in the term, we can go ahead and edit or add the dates of 2022 to 2024. And then in the next sentence, when it talks about if the contract is not negotiated by September 30th, I edited and added the 2024 date, which would be the expiration of the CLA. Is everyone agreeable to that?
Yes. Yes.
On page 6, it was just a simple edit of making timeline from 2 words to 1 word. Are you agreeable to that change?
Yes.
And how have those edits been handled? Is it okay to go ahead and just accept that change?
I would keep it in red line
Okay.
format, yeah.
With a comment saying that it was agreed upon?
I think what we will probably do is go through the entire thing, and then if there's anything that we don't agree on, we kind of note those items, and we can just note the fact that we agree to everything else.
Okay. Moving down to page 7, another conjoined word from workday being 2 words to 1. You agreeable to that?
Yes.
Moving down to page 7, in section D, there is, it speaks about the rules and regulations, and I had redlined the areas in which we spoke of which talked about the civil service rules, recognizing that the civil service rules and the Civil Service Commission is no longer in place here in the city of Boise. References to the civil service rules is removed and just clarified to recognize how everything works without actually noting the civil service and regulations in the paragraph.
So the items that are going to be, or that are formerly in the civil service rules, how do you plan to address those?
Those will actually be discussed as proposals. When we looked at the MOU, it actually noted that the intent was to take the MOU and actually incorporate it into the CLA. I think it was supposed to occur in the last contract. It didn't. So we would like to bring those forward as proposals so that we could put them in.
Okay, so that's acceptable.
Moving down to page 11. There is a section, section C, which is currently in section 4, which is under compensation. And it speaks about how nothing in this section shall be construed to limit the discretion of Boise City to determining staffing levels in any police division or unit, and Boise City retains the right to combine, increase, or reduce specialty units and specialty assignments. It was deleted from that section and actually just moved to section 6, which actually speaks to working conditions, and felt that it was more appropriate in that section. So the language wasn't changed at all. It was just moved from the compensation section to the working conditions section. So you'll see it deleted there, but then when we get to section 6, you'll see it inserted with the identical language.
Okay, sounds good.
Now moving on to page 15, where it's section F, which talks about an officer missing mandatory paid training. I just redlined out the last part of the last sentence, which talks about discipline up to and including or up to a discipline board proceeding. Now that the corrective action policy has changed, the discipline board proceeding, that section technically was no longer applicable in this sense. And so I just removed it.
Makes sense.
Moving on to page 19, still talking about disciplinary action, section D. There was a section in there that read, in all other situations, appropriate disciplinary action will be taken with full consideration given to all mitigating or aggravating circumstances. The thought process was the same as the previous deletion, and that with the new corrective action policy, this section was no longer needed.
Just stand by one on that. We understand that the discipline matrix and the corrective action policy and all that applies for mitigating factors, but that's also a policy which can be changed without any consultation. We'd like to probably leave some of that in there in some capacity in a way that it would correspond with the matrix or speak of the discipline matrix. That way, if, Chief Lee gets run over by a bus next week and you were with them and we get somebody else in here, that mitigating circumstances are no longer allowed.
Okay, so you'd like some language in here, maybe referencing the current policy, the corrective action guide as it stands?
Yeah, well, specifically the considerations for mitigation or aggravating circumstances, we would prefer that to still be contractual. That way, if policy changes, we still have that as a anchor point, so to speak.
So we can go ahead and put a note on this to discuss further at another time. Okay, moving to page 21. In the section that talks about the administrative pay for sergeants, I had added a section in there with a recent uptick of the need for acting field commanders. We want to make sure that if there's an acting field commander who's backfilling for a sergeant, that the administrative pay can only be claimed by either the person who's in the acting field commander position or the sergeant who works it, but not cumulatively both. Now they could split it, but we just want to make sure that there's language in there that demonstrates that if there is someone who is in that acting field commander position, acting in lieu of the sergeant, that both people aren't putting in for the administrative overtime hours for their duties.
Yeah, we agree to that.
Okay. Also on page 21, there was a section that talked about sergeants in narcotics, property crimes, school resource officer. That language actually expired April 1st of 2020. So we were just removing it from the CLA.
Yes, we're good.
Moving down to page 23 regarding the cleaning of uniforms. There was language in there that related to prior dates, and I just removed those dates and made it clear in that Boise City will provide $480 per member per year to use toward cleaning services of their choice.
Yeah, we're good with that.
On page 24, the section that talks about probationary officers receiving uniforms, it was removal of that language, recognizing that probationary officers aren't actually covered by the CLA. So we just wanted to remove any language pertaining to them in the CLA.
I'm assuming that there's a plan to deal with the uniform allowance stuff coming from you guys down the road.
The uniform allowance in the CLA will still remain the same for members, and not that it's going to change. It was just taking out any reference to unrepresented employees.
Yeah, we obviously have some concerns that we want the city to take care of new members. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to get new members, but we understand that the CLA does not cover probationary officers, so we're fine with removal of that.
Just below that, there's reference to the paid holidays. I just put a note in there that the dates will need to be updated, and then there'll need to be the addition of the new federal holiday, Juneteenth, in there.
Yeah, we understand.
On page 24 in section 11, I added a sentence in there regarding holiday compensation may be applied as pay or comp time. And it's my understanding that that's the current practice, but with upcoming retirements, we wanted to make sure that it was memorialized in the CLA if you wanted to continue that practice.
Yeah, we're good with that.
Moving on to page 25 regarding the vacation leave accrual. Currently, it was listed in there per month, recognizing that we get paid bi-weekly. So therefore, there are 26 pay periods. Changing it to be an accrual based on each pay period. The amounts that I put in there, feel free to check, but nothing changed from the amount on how much you accrue. It's just instead of it being on a monthly, which is not how the payroll system works, changing it to a per pay period and everything else. So the accrual rate remains the same. It's just how it's actually divvied out to the employees would be per pay period instead of on a monthly basis.
Sorry. Yes, we're okay with that change.
And then on page 26 with the sick leave, I did the same thing and just made it per pay period versus per month.
So we're agreeable to the concept. We plan on putting a proposal together related to sick leave. So the hours may change if you want to make a note in there. But the concept is acceptable to us.
Okay, so I just entered in a comment there saying the concept agreeable to the union, proposal forthcoming regarding rate of accrual. Does that capture what?
Correct.
Okay. On page 27 regarding a 0.5% of the members' annual base salary into their, do we call that something? Or just the PEHP?
Sorry, it's an HRA VIBA.
Okay, I knew it as VIBA, so I didn't know what the PHE. There were dates in there. Those dates need to be changed.
Do you want to change up the AJR VIBA to PHP from PHP to the VIBA language while you're there?
I would agree to that. I actually put in some notes that I would like that changed to the HRA VIBA since that's the current usage.
So I'll put a note. And I'm sorry, what is it called? Okay, moving down to page 29. There is the added language that was moved from section 4 to section 6, as mentioned earlier. And again, nothing has been changed in that.
Union's agreeable.
On page 30, regarding the shifts and the hours in which members can work, section 3 talked about CID and COD having a choice between 5/8 and 4/10s. This CLA was created prior to the TED division creation, and so I just added the TED division in there to give them that opportunity as well.
We're agreeable.
On page 34, the section that talks about grievances, it talked about the grievance procedure as set forth above. On the document, it's actually below, so I just changed it from above to below. Does that sound good?
Yes, we're agreeable.
On page 37, under the voluntary mediation, the previous section identified that section as being hearing officer. So we just changed it from voluntary mediation to mediator. So there are two choices as a grievance process proceeds forward that a union member has, either through a hearing officer or through a mediator. So it was just a matter of changing the language from voluntary mediation to mediator.
Agreeable.
And I believe the last change that at least was highlighted was on page 47. And that just had to do with the date that the CLA is executed.
Agreeable.
So with that, does the union have any edits or clarifying language that they would like to speak about in the current CLA?
I think the majority of the language changes will come as a result of proposals or in a negotiated portion of the proposals as far as the language. So I think those cleanups are pretty good from our side. And like I said, related to the proposals that we'll be negotiating, I guess.
Okay, so at this time, are there proposals that you would like to bring forward?
Yes, we will drop a proposal. I don't know if you want to take a break or if we want to press through. Okay, we'll press through. We'll drop a proposal in there. Okay, so we dropped in a proposal that we would like to put into the prevailing rights. It's titled Proposal A. I'll give you a minute to read it and then we can go through it.
Just for clarification, do you have any red line version of this so we can see what's currently in there versus what the proposed changes are?
There's nothing in there
Okay,
currently.
well, then that's helpful. All right, thank you.
So are you proposing that even the probationary officers not covered by the CLA would have access to the grievance procedure?
Yeah, no, we intend to keep it the same. We don't intend for non-members to have access to the grievance, whether they're on probation or not probation. If police officers are not part of the union, they're not part of the CLA, they get the benefit of some of it, but they also don't get the grievance process. They have to go with the city process. So we're not intending to change that
Okay,
in what we're asking for.
okay. Just the language under number 2 is confusing because it says regardless of their probationary status.
Yeah, specifically, we're talking about members. The discipline matrix is contradictory to current CLA contract in the sense that if I promote as a member, as a sergeant, and I'm on probation, the way the current policy reads on the discipline side is that the grievance process is not afforded me as a probationary sergeant. And we want to clean that up and make sure that even members that are sergeants that may be in a probationary status due to a promotion have access to that grievance process. That's our intent.
Okay.
If you're willing, it would be helpful for me to understand some of the background and your thinking in bringing the proposal. And then I'm assuming the city would like the opportunity to respond to this, but it's helpful for me to get some of your thinking and some of the background for the proposal.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have policies that dictate how disciplinary procedures occur. However, there is no guarantee for the officers to be notified. There's no, an inquiry could open in September and stay open until February, March, April, May, before maybe it possibly turns into an inquiry. We've had incidences in the past where that's been abused. So the goal is so that if somebody's getting a complaint, they know, hey, you're getting a complaint, the general concept of the complaint, when this occurred and who's complaining, if that information is available. And we're talking non-criminal complaints, obviously. So we want to clean some of that up. I think officers should be entitled to notification that they're under investigation. And I think that's only fair. And so secondly, like I said, the discipline matrix specifically says that anybody on probation, which would include supervisors promoted that are members, we want to make sure that that's clean, because if a member gets promoted to sergeant and then they're being disciplined for some specific reason, we want them to be afforded the right of a grievance in that process that the city and the union have agreed to in the past. So really what we're asking for is a little more skin in the game related to discipline. Currently we have policies, but those policies are hard to be followed sometimes by the internal affairs. So our intent, especially as we go down with the notifications and the just cause and the clear and convincing, currently the standard is preponderance of evidence. Now the internal affairs and the department typically says if it's more severe discipline, you might be terminated, that they change that standard, but that's not in writing. That's not anything. So we just think that there should be a higher standard for people that are receiving discipline than 51%. We think you did it, as the preponderance of evidence rules usually apply. And then we've had a bad problem of internal affairs sending mass emails, like 30 emails to the chief saying, I need to extend these 30 cases. And we don't think that's fair to our members. And we think that they should be held to a higher standard. I couldn't do that as a detective and just slough off my investigations for a long period of time without receiving discipline. So we just want to memorialize it in a contract and solidify some rights for the officers, so to speak.
Thank you. That's helpful. Do you mind if I repeat that in my language, just so I make sure I understand? It'll be real brief.
Sure.
That is my style. So the goal that's intended behind this proposal is a better understanding of the intake of complaints, the notification to the officer, who gets access to which process, the timeline to the resolution of the complaint, and the standard on which that complaint is moved forward. Do I
Yes.
have that? Awesome. Thank you.
And then if I can just add in there the one piece under 4, just an explanation there, because it refers to the Fraternal Order of Police, which obviously is not the union. The issue we've had is if we have a member who chooses not to use a union attorney in the investigation or process, but they're going to go through the grievance process, we want to be sure to be able to have a union representative present as well, because the union grievance process is what we'll be using, if that makes sense. So under 4, that's why it refers to the FOP there.
Yeah,
we
I'm
want to
sorry.
put a union member in there as well.
Yeah, and so we've had some complaints from internal affairs because we've had an FOP attorney and a union representative in there. And they're unhappy with having 2 people represent the officer. So we wanted to memorialize that. Additionally, you'll see that there's definitions. What we really like to do in the CLA is provide a definitions glossary on some of the terms so that they are clearly stated and defined, so they're not ambiguous going down the road that could end up in a grievance, et cetera. So we kind of just highlighted some of the things as a defined what we would like to interpret those as, and hope that we can put them in the CLA as a glossary of definitions as part of that package.
I just had one question. Is it your intent that members who are not accused of misconduct, but are there in the interview as a witness are entitled to representation as well?
Yeah, so currently the standard is if you're being a witness or you're subject to the investigation, you're afforded representation, and we'd like to continue that. Do you think 72 hours, Chief, is enough time for notification procedurally?
I would have to look at and give consideration to all the circumstances. I think generally speaking, yes, there might be times where that would not be applicable, but as I sit here now, I would have to say that I'd have to give that additional consideration, and maybe this is something that we could talk about further after a caucus.
The other thing that comes up in other police bargaining I've had is oftentimes a complaint might come in and all it takes is a quick check by the supervisor to realize this complaint about this officer is unfounded. This officer wasn't even in this location or whatever. And are you still wanting notification of those types of things, or just things that would actually result in an investigation?
No, I think the current policy allows for those. We're talking about formalized inquiries or formalized investigations as defined by our current policies that basically spell out how to take those. So that wouldn't include those kinds of things. We're amenable to that policy.
Okay.
And then another question I had, is this for both internally and externally generated complaints, or is this specifically talking about external?
I think we're talking about both complaints.
I think then we do need to revisit the timeline. So my understanding of this is if the mayor's office gets a call that's a complaint about an officer, which we do on a Friday, let's say at 4, the turnaround to get back through the
Sure.
BPD system to get that to the officer, 72 hours is probably unreasonable, but we can look at that.
Yeah, and we are flexible related to, the hours. We want to make it reasonable, so that's why I was kind of asking if we felt like that could be a realistic time. Yeah, I mean, we could change that to upon receipt from internal affairs, or the upon receipt to the community outreach person. So once their office gets it, that would be easy to do.
I think we can look into that. We just need the opportunity to understand that timing. That's all.
Sure, understand.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Or should we pass this for now for us to have an opportunity to discuss it further in caucus and move on to another proposal?
That sounds good.
Okay.
I'll see if I can do the second one. No promises. No promises. All right, there should be a second one in the folder if that worked out all right.
Is that proposal D? Got it.
Affirm.
Mine's cut off. It's only showing half of it.
Oh, we celebrated too early. I think there's something wrong with the Word doc.
So I've copied and pasted the text into another Word document. I'm happy just to drop it in if that's helpful.
Thank you.
So is this proposal D or B? D? Okay.
D as in David, yes.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, just for clarification, does this also represent all new language? Or is this a change to the current contract?
This would be a partial change in addition to
Okay.
section 6, subsection G.
Just a point of clarification, in number 2, it has the word, the department will provide 5, but the number is 6, which would you prefer? 6.
6, we'll make that correction real quick.
I think we've all had an opportunity to read this, so if you would help me understand what your thinking is here, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Currently, we do 4 2-hour blocks and 8 open ranges annually on the firearm side. And what we're really looking to do is guarantee a minimum amount of high liability training for our members, specifically firearms, use of force, defensive tactics items. And so what we're proposing is to go to 4 full days of training as a minimum in covering those areas. Right now, there is no minimum for defensive tactics, use of force items. And we've had a significant issue with scheduling, manpower issues, lack of training. And so we're looking to protect some of that high liability training by requiring it in 4 one-day blocks quarterly, with them 4 hours being at least firearms and the rest being any one of those use of force high liability issues.
If we currently don't have a minimum, do we know, and I'll look this way, if anyone knows what operationally we're doing? If we don't have a minimum standard, what's the current practice? Do you know?
Well, there are a number of high liability training areas that need to be covered by the police department. This one specifically relating to firearms is actually covered in a section currently in the CLA. And under the current CLA, it states that there will be mandatory firearms training on a quarterly basis with monthly voluntary firearms training made available for people. So this is a change actually to that language with some additional aspects to it.
Thank you.
So historically, we have trained, the number of hours of trained have really fluctuated with the scheduling, the manpower, the needs of what's transpiring in the world and et cetera. But, obviously COVID was an issue and training kind of subsided, but under the previous administration, we really throttled down training. And the union thinks that hiring good people and training them properly is the best success for the citizens and the city and us. And so we want to memorialize a minimum amount of training.
I'll say, as I sit here, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I believe that training, for all of us is vitally important. Being confined in this specific area when there are so many areas that require training, I think is a little narrow in focus. And as I sit here, I'm not entirely sure that the CLA is the location where that needs to be documented, but possibly through policy and with working with the TED division. I think if anything, I would hope to speak more globally about the different types of training, not just firearms.
So we want to ensure a minimum amount of training. We're not saying that this covers all the training needs, or this is the only training that we should have. But we're saying that currently TED is not successfully getting this job done for us, is what we're saying. And I want the protection in the current state of affairs for the world and for the citizens, for officers to have at least some minimum training that is a guaranteed. I mean, we know that there's EVOC that has to occur and there's legal liability stuff and there's a million things that we have to train on. But, I've been to 4 hours of defensive tactics training in the last 4 years, and that's unacceptable personally. Okay. So I understand what you're saying, Chief, but we need some protections because it's not getting done. And under the last administration, training got pushed under the bus. So how do I protect my members? And I think if we have a minimum standard that covers some things, it's a starting point. And I agree that policy is the best place for that. And TED is the group that's designed to do that. But I'm sure you've had many meetings with Kyle over training and this manpower issues and the headaches that it's causing. So we want to make sure guys are getting trained.
Okay. This is another item I think that we can bring back later after some further discussion.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So this body of training you have determined is the most important to implement minimum standards on. And by, I think the phrase current state of the world, you believe these are the more critical or life-saving training opportunities that we need to ensure are provided to the officers. Do I have that right? Because you're not trying to cover the whole body of minimum, but I'm assuming these are your most critical. So you want to ensure they're happening on a frequent basis.
Yeah, I think that yes, I think that these are a very minimum subject that needs to be covered for the citizens and for liability of the city and for liability and safety of the officers, that we need to have at least something that we can protect the citizens and ourselves without depending on overtime budgets and lack of manpower, et cetera.
Sure, understood. I just wanted to be clear that of the list of all the training that you guys probably have, you've identified this as the most important, which is why you want minimums on these trainings, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then just an additional question. So recognizing that firearms training is currently documented in the current CLA, this seems to be a proposal to increase those numbers. And so I would ask how you came up with or how you decided that this was the appropriate amount versus what is currently listed.
So obviously any training costs money, and we're aware of the ammo situation. We're aware of the hourly and the manpower issues, but 2 hours of firearms, I've been teaching and ran the training academy and been in the firearms and training world for over 20 years. The way we do our firearms training, 2 hours is pretty limiting and pretty unsubstantial, because officers get there, they have to gear up, they have to clean up. That's a half an hour. So we're getting our officers maybe an hour and a half of training times 4. That's pretty underwhelming. And I think that we try to balance the costs and what could be a minimum amount that guys could go out and do some things to try to come up with. And I didn't want to make it substantially more, because I know that costs money and I know it takes time and we're in a manpower crunch. So at 4 hours of firearms and 6 hours or 5.5 hours of others with a launch, that gives us one day for officers to unplug. I mean, currently the way the firearms goes is you show up, you come to work a half an hour early, you drive down to the range, you shoot for an hour and a half, clean up for half an hour, you drive home for 2 hours, you change, you go to lunch, and it kills like a full day of work, almost 6 hours. And it's very inefficient, very inefficient. So what we're proposing is that quarterly officers, members, unplug for the day and go do high priority training for us. And so that's kind of where we came up with this, this idea. I mean, we're open to more, obviously. And that's why we said it's just a minimal standard. But at the same time, honestly, if you decided or the chief decided that we're only going to do a qualification annually, that meets the post requirements, we could do an hour of training. It's just unsatisfactory to our citizens. We're doing injustice to our officers if we don't have some kind of minimum.
So at this point, you believe that the amount of training that we're receiving in firearms is not adequate?
Yeah, that's what we're saying. And there's no guarantees that we even continue. I mean, the contract's expiring, but in theory, if we put it all into policy, then we're subject to the whim of the administration.
And forgive me, I don't know the answer to this. The surrounding agencies, do they meet this standard as well? I mean,
So-
is this out of line for what kind of the industry standard is in our local area?
Currently, Ada County does 4 full days of training on the firearms range, just for firearms. So they're looking at 40 hours of firearms training annually for the Ada County Sheriff's Department. Meridian does quarterly 4-hour blocks. So it's consistent with what they're doing. The state police, I'm not familiar with what the state police does.
They're the same as Meridian, maybe a little bit more. They kind of do it more as needed, but they're pretty much a minimum when I asked Ed yesterday of 4 times 4 hours a year, or 4 hours 4 times a year.
So it's in line with what the other local agencies are doing on their standards. If there's no other questions, we'll just table that and we'll go to the next thing, if we can get it open. Should be proposal B.
I have it and I can read it.
And this would be a new item, not a existing CLA item.
Did everybody have a chance to read that? All right.
So currently, our sergeant's span of control is very substantial. Anywhere between 10 and 12 officers are supervising. There's a significant amount of responsibilities that they're in charge of. It has a tendency to drive them out of the field and into the office. What we're proposing is creating a rank of corporal that is a tested supervisor rank that will be covered in the what will be the new civil service rule sections to alleviate some of the responsibilities and free up the sergeants to assist and provide the city with a better span of control to manage calls in the field. We would, based on the civil service rules, we're looking to implement this not this first year, but in the second year due to manpower and trying to come up with SOPs and how we could utilize it. But our goal is to provide some training for them as supervisors and create a probationary period similar to the sergeants with training similar to the sergeants. And essentially it would be a first line supervisor. And the goal is to alleviate some of the responsibilities of the sergeant as the city continues to grow and as the span of control continues to grow. So we're looking to generate a corporal rank.
Did you, and we can do this, but I just wonder if you have this, did you look at the financial implications for so if it's a corporal for every sergeant, if I'm reading this right, what the increased cost that represents?
We do have some of those numbers. We figured on covering that kind of on the compensation pay side and vetting that out a little more. We anticipate not adding FTEs to the organization necessarily, but utilizing the numbers that we have and defining those roles as a corporal where they would still be able to handle calls for service, but also act as a supervisor in the field. And so we're not looking to uptick the FTE rate. We're just looking to help the sergeants out some.
Thank you. And when you mentioned the sergeants are currently spending less time in the field and more at the desk, could you explain that to me just a little?
Yeah, so in the old days, because I'm old, we used to cap our span of control, how many people a supervisor at 6. Okay. Some teams are running 12 officers on their teams. So the amount of reports that are being generated, the amount of blue team documentations, administrative incident reports, handling of complaints, collateral duties that they have, general leadership that they have, pulls them away from the field. And when they're in the station, they can't be managing any kind of critical incident or they're going to break out for a critical incident, but any kind of high risk operation that could be going on in the field. Additionally, what happens now is most supervisors don't have time to read all the reports. So they say, this person writes good reports, I just approve it. And sometimes that can cause headaches for the organization and the officers. And so we're looking in some way to do it. So currently we have an AFC capacity. If the sergeant is gone, an acting field supervisor steps in and acts as a sergeant. This would kind of alleviate that because they would be a formalized supervisor. And so it's a little bit of a challenge to have an AFC where today I'm writing a 2-man car or handling a call with a friend of mine, and the next day I'm handling a complaint on him. And then the following day I'm back to being his peer. And so we want to try to formalize that role. And that's what we're looking to do and alleviate some of those responsibilities.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So in the balance of responsibilities between this proposal and sergeants, who bears the brunt of the admin work?
So I think the organization would be the best place to develop those procedures and how that would be utilized. One of the goals is to push it off a year, but agree to it potentially during this contract is to develop how that would look, how many we really need, et cetera.
Thank you.
So Denny, I've got a question. And now, again, new to the organization I previously came from had a setup very similar to this. However, coming here, I recognize that we probably have upwards of 50 corporals now. And so my question to you based on this language is, what do we do with the existing corporals? Would they forego that title, remove those stripes? How do you see this working and migrating from the current situation in which the corporal position has been solely based on number of years for service
Correct.
to a quasi supervisory role?
So what we would advocate is that the corporal's attrition out, it's a current pay grade. We change the insignia that the pay grade corporals have. Perhaps like you've seen, there's the chevrons with a star. Maybe that could represent the actual supervisor, and people that are current corporals like myself and Corporal Wills. Here you, Corporal. And AJ, sorry, I didn't want to downplay him. You know, we could go to a single, like a Lance Corporal, military style, with the single chevron until you retire, et cetera. And so one would signify the rank of pay grade, one would be an actual supervisor rank. There's a lot of ways when we're very open to how we do that. If we want to change that name, I mean, most of the members are not necessarily stuck on the emotionally attached to the corporal title. It's more the pay grade that they're attached to. So there's a lot of ways we can resolve that. And we understand that those things are not, they're going to play out in the next year if we decide to go down this path. We're just looking for a conceptual commitment and how we can play that out for future.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So we would keep the corporals we have. We would make some supervisors, and that you're thinking that's a 2 pay grade system. I'm assuming you want more compensation for the ones that are in a supervisory role versus the ones who are not, correct?
Yeah, in our next proposal, we want to condense the pay grades and restructure that whole system. So we'll show you during that what we're kind of thinking.
Thank you.
But yeah, there would be, the current corporals would fall into what we're getting ready to go into would be a master officer pay grade, which is what their current pay grade is, you know,
Okay.
depending on how these events turn out. But the corporal would actually be a supervisor, would be a tested rank. The corporal, you would have to be a corporal and or a detective, with which we'll discuss in a minute, to test for sergeant. And so it would just be the first step in developing supervisors.
Thank you.
So we'll, unless anybody has any other questions,
I think you and I are thinking the same thing.
we'll press on to the next one or take a break. Do we need to take a break?
Oh, I was on the break camp.
Okay.
So how about 15 minutes?
15
Does that
minutes.
work
Let's
for you
take a break.
guys? Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank
And,
you.
make yourselves at home in City Hall. If you need something, just let someone know who can find whatever it is you need. Thank you.
Thank you.
But actually, while we are taking just a quick break, I believe we have the printed out ground rules. Perhaps you could look through those, sign them, and we can at least get that administratively closed up. Thank you.
We ready to start back up?
Are we on? You can see us. All right, cool. Yep, we're ready.
So we dropped in proposal C in there. I'll give you a moment to look at it if you haven't.
And
that
while
has-
we're pulling that up, we did drop in the ground rules that I believe you signed. So that's all in the shared doc now.
Thank you, Jamie.
Uh-huh. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
So this has to do with the compressed pay scale.
I'm going to assume this is not entirely new. Are you adjusting existing language?
Yeah, section 4 and appendix A
Okay,
speaks to some of this.
thank you.
So on this, we're looking to condense the pay scale to be more in line with national standards. And what we're looking at is a 10-year from hire to 10 years pay schedule. That would include both laterals and new hires all into one scale. We currently have 2 scales or maybe 3 scales. It's pretty confusing. What we're looking to do is alleviate the discrepancy that the chief has on where they can bring in lateral officers pay wise and basically get it to an industry standard of half credit for year service. So if you had 10 years of service, you would start at a 5-year pay grade or on our 5-year pay grade scale. So you'd be getting a half credit. So if a lateral officer was hired with 4 years, they would start at a 2-year pay scale. And to try to simplify it, down on the appendix A, which is a revamp of the current appendix A, we have the months of service and the grades on the left, which we talked about. Corporal, if we go down that road, obviously is a supervisory rank and it's listed over there. There would be 2 ranks of corporal, corporal 2 and corporal 1. Corporal 1s we would propose on the civil service side would be able to test for sergeant, and so would detective grade 1s. So we did not want to limit promotional capability to the patrol group only. We wanted to be able to have detectives eligible to promote with years of experience. So our current pay grades go all the way out to 20 years. So not speaking to the economic side yet, we just are attaching the pay grades without where the dollar figures would land for those and how many people we have, et cetera, just as a concept to how that would progress.
So Denny, I just have a quick question. You said that the half credit for lateral service is an industry standard.
We pulled approximately 12 peer cities and found that to be the most common theme for how to handle lateral service. So I wouldn't say it's a national industry standard, but there are a lot of agencies in the West that specifically used kind of that.
Would you mind, do you have those 12 cities? Would you mind sharing them?
Yes.
It would just be helpful as we look at our wage comps in those cities to understand which ones we're talking about.
Yeah, and we can drop, I don't know if I have that on my current drive. We can drop that in there
Thank you.
for review.
And so there's no consideration given to the type of city, the level of experience, a 10-year officer at, I don't even know, Salmon? Is that a small town
Yes.
out here?
Yes,
Uh,
I'm sure they would think.
PC,
differently,
I
but
thought
yes.
you were going straight for Glenn's Ferry, but Salmon's a good call.
just recognizing that a 10-year officer at one city may not bring the same level of experience that a 10-year officer from a busier, larger city would. How do you?
It's a difficult matrix to try to figure out. We've had, so in the 26 years I've worked here, we've had people come from all over, mostly the West, large cities, small cities, right? And so we've gotten officers from Los Angeles County and Los Angeles Police Department and Phoenix and Seattle and you name the big city. Some of them have been good, some of them haven't been good. And their level of experience and their time in service there really didn't reflect it. And there was really no great way to quantify it. The problem that we had recently was under the previous administration, very discretionary. He downplayed all that experience. The current administration took it a little more serious and upgraded it. And then you had guys in the middle that are causing problems. So what we're looking to do is probably alleviate the discretionary side and just hope for hiring quality people and taking that into consideration, that if you're a lateral officer from somewhere, we've vetted you through the hiring process, through the training process, and we're hoping that you're going to come in and be a solid officer. That's why we hired you. So I really kind of, my heart is on both sides. I was a lateral officer that came here. So, but we don't really have a good way of quantifying it. And we really want to take the discretion away from the organization. No offense to you, because the next chief could come in and be like, no, we're not paying our laterals for their experience. We're dropping them here at the bottom part of that scale. And that has happened before. So we figure the safest way to do that is just say, hey, you're getting half credit. And additionally, when it comes to recruiting, many guys from many agencies will literally get online and be like, okay, this is how many years of service I have. What could I make if I decide to move to Boise? And we want a simple format. So when they're online, they can understand this is how much I'm going to make. Okay, can I afford that? Can I make my plans on that? Not what will the chief, if he hires me, bring me in at, which is very discretionary. So that's kind of our thought process behind it. But we are open on the lateral side. It's not something we're hardcore on. We just try to have a way to quantify it.
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn when I say I believe there's a shared interest in simplifying that pay scale for everyone's sake.
Yeah, no, we're all in agreement on that. So on the actual levels, we are open to changing the months of service for different levels. We just tried to pick levels that we thought were appropriate as far as service, and we're open to suggestions on changes if the deputy chief has some thoughts on that down the road. It's not something we're hardcore on. It's just we would like to compress it to a 10-year pay scale, and we want to simplify it and have one pay scale so that guys can go forward on that.
Okay. And just based on what I'm seeing here, it looks as though you see these steps being commensurate with your time on the department. Is that kind of the intent behind this? Recognizing maybe two people coming in at the same time, 8, 9, 10 years later, may not be producing the same amount of work, may not be in the same place within their career and the additional responsibilities, ancillary duties that they're taking on. You believe that those two people, just by mere virtue of them coming in at the same date, are entitled to the same pay, while one might be significantly outperforming the other?
No, when we get to the compensation pay, we think that incentive pays will address that, similar to what we have with the FTOs, where if you have extra duties, responsibilities, and liabilities, there will be some kind of compensation for that. Currently, as you know, we have no evaluation system for officers. So it'd be pretty hard to quantify whether an officer does a good job or doesn't do a good job, and how that would affect their pay, because we don't have that system. We have no evaluation system for officers. So we've always gone with years of service. I mean, we are not opposed to evaluations. As we discussed with Chief Lee, when it came to sergeants, et cetera, and promotions. But yet we don't have that system. So I don't know how else we'd quantify a pay scale other than time and service. But we do agree that having incentives for additional responsibilities is a critical factor for motivating people and having high quality people and rewarding people for doing a quality job.
I don't have any other questions.
I have
We could take this under consideration.
I just have a quick point of clarification. And Appendix A and the title, it's service time and civil service requirements. It's my understanding that civil service requirements don't exist anymore. So would that be qualifications or?
Well, we know that we're going to address that from the previous conversation, and we both need to from both our sides. So whatever that turns into, obviously will, whether that's general orders, whether that's a policy, how that plays out, we had to call it something to put it on paper.
And then one other question, and this may come later, but understanding your view, how do we migrate from current structure to the new structure will help inform how we cost out, what that might do. So maybe that comes later with your economic proposal, but that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we have an idea of where we want those, how that would transition over to this, which obviously involves this pay grade would go to here, and those are economic costs based on number of employees, et cetera. So, we plan on addressing that, so to speak, in the future.
Great, thank you.
We only have one more proposal, and we will, that we're proposing today for addressing. I will drop it in the folder.
Is it proposal C or was that the last one? Yeah.
Let's see.
That's fine.
Proposal E.
You're killing me with the out of order alphabet, but we'll get there.
We did that on purpose.
I know. Just to make sure I'm paying attention, I'm sure.
And it might have even come in there properly. So this has to do with the on-body video.
So I just want to I'm gonna make sure I'm tracking here. So our new body cameras and the new equipment the city has purchased have added capacities, and you would like to limit those capacities so that they're not turned on remotely or activated in some other way.
That
Is
is,
that what
that-
this is in response to?
that
Okay.
is correct. And we feel like it's a working condition and something to be had in the CLA going down the road. We're not opposed to it maybe in the future, but we feel like it's a working condition that needs to be negotiated.
I just
outside.
wanted to make sure
Yep.
this is new because of the new
Correct.
technology and the new capabilities, right?
That
Okay.
is correct.
All right.
So Denny, I just noticed when I'm reading this, you talk about limiting the remote activation solely to the taser. So are you opposed to it being activated when you activate the lights and siren in your car or pull your firearm?
Yes. At this point in time, because we feel like it's a working condition. And if the city wants a counter proposal to those kinds of things, we're okay to caucus on them or table them or review them. But what we are finding is that, for example, with the taser, you have to be very diligent with putting them in the sleep mode because the range of the taser. So I'm in the locker room, and if a female's in the female locker room and she activates her taser and it's not, or I activate my taser and it's not in sleep mode, it has a potential for turning it on. And then we have to go through this whole process. Additionally, we don't feel that there's any real value for a supervisor to remotely activate the body camera at any time or whim. And so we're willing to discuss that in the future, but as we stands right now, unless the department has something in line or on the works, we just feel like it's a working condition and we want to limit that working condition with at this point in time and potentially in the future look to change it.
No, completely understand what you're saying. I guess I'm just asking for your reasoning behind why you feel it's more appropriate for a camera to be activated when you draw your taser versus your firearm.
Well, I personally think that when the body video came out, it should have been negotiated as a working condition because I think that's the most applicable place for it to be. However, past negotiators or unions haven't really made an issue with that. It is an issue in a lot of places. My concern is why should you be able to remotely access it when I'm at my house having lunch? My wife might be in her pajamas or something like that. So we want to just make sure that the organization is, we fully support having body cameras. We fully support that. That's a big part of the trust. We fully support using them. And we think that's a great tool in law enforcement. But what we don't want to do is go down the road of, yeah, every time you exit your car, this turns on. Every time this happens, or like I said, I'm at my house on lunch break and you remotely access it, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So we just feel like it's a working condition and we feel like we want to limit it to what we're doing now. Now, if the city or the department has something on the works related to changing that, we can discuss it, but we want to limit it. Yes.
Okay.
Just-
So if I,
Just to your point, Chief, I think what you're asking is, we think we're already too far down the road on the tasers. It's not that we are okay with it being with taser. We just feel like that ship has sailed. So we're just looking at what could be coming in the future.
okay, so basically the proposal is just recognizing the standard that we have now, not adding to it.
Correct.
Okay.
And I have one quick question. Do you have any of the research on the errant videos, like the locker room example?
It is such a new system, but I will tell you of a personal example. We were in the defensive tactics training room, which is maybe 75 yards away, 60 yards away. And Officer Richmond was working on the new tasers and we were in taser training. And he had to come in and say, I got to stop training or working with these to assign them and do the work he was doing because every time we were activating our taser all the way across the building, it was activating the cameras. And so we don't necessarily have any bad issues that have come across yet, but we're trying to prevent them. So given the current system, if I go to the restroom and I forget to hit it on sleep mode and you're in the briefing room and you activate the taser, it's going to videotape me going to the restroom. And so there's some privacy issues that we have now. The department does have a current policy that, you know, those can be alleviated. What that requires for the supervisor to watch it and internal affairs to watch it. And we just want to, like I said, we do believe that it's a big part of public confidence and it's a big part of our job and we accept that. We just want to make sure that it's not being remotely accessed and there's not weird things that are coming down the road that we're unaware of.
But you don't have any examples of the remote access, correct?
No, the policy just went into place maybe 2 weeks ago. So it's pretty new. Everybody's just spinning up on them.
So as I understand it, the department doesn't have the ability at this time to remote access. They didn't purchase that option. Is that
I believe
that-
that is correct.
okay.
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
That answered your question or not, but we just want to protect our guys' privacy. We want to negotiate for any future activation types of systems. We think what we have is, acceptable, but we want to prevent it from going further.
I don't have any additional questions on that.
But that is all the proposals that we have for today. I don't know if you guys have some proposals outside of the language change.
Yeah, we do have some proposals today. Should we start sharing some of these? Or do you want to take a break
I
first?
thought we were going to caucus first.
Okay.
We can, I'm not sure we're in a position to respond to these today, given the situation. So perhaps in the interest of time is to go through some of our proposals, get through lunch and see where we are. But if you want a caucus, Chief, we can do that.
Maybe just for 10, 15
Oh,
minutes.
sure. Is that agreeable?
That's agreeable.
Thanks.
Thank you.
everybody ready to get started again? All right. Good. So the city would like to present a series of proposals. We would also like to break for lunch at about noon. So we'll get through as many as we can before then, and we'll probably expect to return at 1 o'clock if that works for you.
Sounds good.
Great.
Okay, I've dropped the first proposal in there. It has to do with probationary officer physical fitness requirement, which is currently in the CLA. I believe it's section 6G. And the proposal at this time is just to remove that language from the CLA, recognizing that probationary officers aren't part of the bargaining group. And so we're just looking to eliminate the language that refers to them.
Not that the standard wouldn't continue to apply to them.
Correct. Which hopefully would actually apply to everyone, not just probationary officers, but removing the language regarding the probationary officers, that this entire section has to do with probationary officers. And again, it's just a matter of removing them from the CLA as they're not covered by it.
I don't think we have any questions related to it. It's fine.
And just so I'm clear, are you saying that you'd be okay with removal of that language?
Yeah, we're okay with the removal of the language.
Okay, I just dropped in the second proposal. This relates to the civilian positions that are referred to in the CLA. It's in section 4, currently under longevity. And the reason for the recommended, I'm sorry.
Chief, I think they need a minute.
Oh,
They
I'm sorry.
didn't show up for us.
If you hit refresh it, they'll probably appear, the little circle in the corner.
So the intent of the removal is, maybe you could vet that out a little bit for us.
So the intent for the removal, it's not to civilianize any sworn work. That's actually what sworn officers are able to do is actually covered in the paragraph following that. It's merely to take out language that refers to people who aren't covered under the current CLA anyway. And so if you actually were to look at section 4C2. So in section 4 of the CLA, which is compensation, it's actually under longevity, but there's a paragraph that speaks specifically about civilians, and then the following paragraph speaks about commissioned duties that are exclusive to the sworn police officers. And so again, there's no intent behind civilianizing any work that's being done by the sworn members. It's merely to take out language that applies to people who aren't covered under the CLA as not part of the bargaining group.
Yeah, I think the reason that it's originally in there in that manner was because we were battling with the replacement of positions for civilian positions. So we'll definitely table that and figure out if there's a better way to say it, but we want to ensure that we're not replacing sworn positions with civilian positions in some capacity. But outside of that, I think it's a concept that we're open to.
Okay, I just dropped in proposal 3.
So just quickly, how do you foresee that playing out on the disciplinary side if that action were to occur for an officer or a member?
So it would be handled under the current corrective action guide. So basically, this is the removal of there's language in here about, in addition to any sort of disciplinary action that someone could receive for failing to appear in court without a justifiable excuse, there was an additional penalty of 3 hours annual leave on the first offense and 6 hours. This is just removing that language completely. And so failure to miss court would be subject to the corrective action guide, just like any other alleged misconduct.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any other questions on that, or?
No, I don't think we have any other questions. We can move on to the next one.
And I just dropped proposal 4.
Can you kind of touch on the reasoning behind that for us?
Sure. So this is regarding the removal of the scheduling pilot language that's currently located in the CLA. And the proposal is just to remove this language, allowing us greater flexibility in the schedule as we look at, as the city continues to grow, as our staffing changes, as the volume of calls for service that we're responding to, as we're looking at a more data-driven model and where we are able to reallocate our staffing resources to be most effective to provide a high level of service to our community. We'd like to kind of work with that from the administration standpoint and actually work through the union as we discuss it, but just basically to remove the language that talks about potential pilot programs.
So I think with the current language in the CLA, it dictates our scheduling. Without some kind of loophole, then you wouldn't be able to change it unless it was a negotiation year. So I think that we definitely probably want to work on this. I understand where you're coming from, and I think that having a more data-driven system is beneficial to us as well as you and the citizens. And so I think we are amenable to something, but without this, unless we change the language in the CLA, the schedule is the schedule and you wouldn't be able to adopt it. So historically, this was kind of put in there to try to have a loophole so we can try something, or the administration could maybe come up with an idea that we could go around. So I think we would definitely want to create something that says that we can do that and guarantee our schedules are our schedule, but have that option open. And so we'll have to figure out on a counter proposal maybe, or some language cleanup, how we really want that to look. Because I think we're all on the same page with that, but by letter, the CLA says this is our schedule. So if we don't change that, then we're stuck with the schedule until the next negotiations.
Sure.
So-
And you brought up a good point that I actually failed to bring up too, is there's another portion of the CLA that speaks specifically about scheduling, the number of hours per shift and everything like that. So this seemed a little bit out of place, but
It's definitely out of place. We just probably will figure out a way that we would like the city to be able to come up with ways to, hey, this is a better potential system. Or perhaps we could come up with some ideas and still be able to go down that road and explore that. So I think conceptually, we're on the same sheet of music. We just got to figure out how that looks.
I'm sorry, were there other questions?
No, we don't have any other questions.
Just put in there proposal 5. No questions on that one?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I thought we got that. Yeah, no questions on that.
Would you just mind saying what it is, Chief, for the record?
Yes,
That'd be
I'm sorry.
great.
Okay, so this is a proposal that speaks about removing language that mandates the amount of time in which a vacant position for sergeant needs to be filled within 30 days. We're looking to remove that language to give the department greater flexibility as we work with various scheduling options and departmental needs.
Just a point of clarification, Chief, that currently says proposal 3. I believe you want to change that to proposal 5.
Thank you.
And that's just essentially to allow the organization more flexibility, more time to come up with that. Do you have an idea of what you would want time-wise, or is it just you want to leave it open-ended?
We'd like to leave it open at this point. I think every situation and circumstance is going to be a little bit different.
Okay. We'll definitely discuss that. But I don't think we have any questions on it. It's straightforward. Thank you.
I just put in proposal 6. And this has to do with actually a topic that we've already discussed earlier regarding the mention of firearms training in the CLA. And our proposal was to move that language from the CLA.
I think we already understand the city's perspective on, or the organization's perspective on that. I don't think we have any questions related to it.
I just put in proposal 7. I'll let you read through it, but this actually also speaks to the topic that was brought up earlier, and it's a proposal to change the druther system from 3 times a year to 2 changes, and signups would be 1 time a year. So you would sign up 1 time for both 6-month time periods of a shift.
And can you kind of get into the organization's need for that? Not the 2 shift, but the druthering once a year versus druthering twice a year. So we have a better understanding.
Sure. So if you've been involved in the druthering, I think most people in here have, but I don't know if they've been involved in it from the administrative standpoint, what it takes to actually schedule the druthers, get everybody in, talk about the different shifts, and then from the administrative standpoint, after the fact of people going in and having to change all the systems, what shift you're on, and you know, all the behind the scenes things that work from where your current assignment is. There's a lot of staff hours that are put into making those changes 3 times a year. And so the intent behind this is, if you go in on 1 druther period, you can actually pick your first 6-month period and your second 6-month period, which gives the officer knowledge of exactly what shift they're going to be working the entire year, as well as the department. You have the opportunity to put in your time off for the entire year at that point, because it's all based on seniority, because when you come in and druther, you'll be doing it based on your ADA number and seniority. So it gives the department and the officers a greater vision of what the entire year looks like. And then any changes that need to be made after that fact, that gives administratively, all of that work can be done at one time. And then any changes that happen throughout the year, it's only changing a few people versus having to change the entire patrol teams.
And currently you think November is a sufficient amount of time, or why did you choose November for a January shift change? Just to stay in line with what we're currently doing? Is that
correct?
Okay.
Recognizing that I think right now we give kind of that 1 month buffer in which the druthering system is completed, and then a month after. So it gives people that time to the administrative people, give them time to work on all that, but also to fall in line with where the CLA currently works is the time frame from how we sign up now.
And the months, so you have January through July and July through January. How hardcore is the organization related to those specific months, or are those months flexible? For example, could you go December to June? I mean, is that something?
It's flexible.
Okay.
It was just
Yeah,
again,
start
to
place.
kind of talk,
Sure.
just to put it on paper
Sure.
and give us an idea of something to work with. That was just kind of looking at a calendar year, but we would be flexible to changing those dates.
Yeah, I just think I'd have to work winter both times versus I could work better hours in the winter. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, the only question I had, Chief, is what would be the department's way to prepare for unexpected? I mean, you're druthering out. The reason we druther 1 month in advance is so that there's less unexpected things happening. So if somebody druthers under your proposal here for a July shift in November, and then we end up with a motor opening and that gets filled, and we end up with 2 people that decide to retire last minute. So come July, I could see druthers being a mess from what they were back in November because so much changes in 7 months. So what would be the way to address that?
And I would say that the example that you used is perfect because, one person retires or one person, goes to a special assignment, motors per se, 2 people retire. We're talking about only having to alter the schedule 3 people. And so we can make those changes and we're only, impacting potentially 3 people. As far as filling potential shifts, I think a consideration could be given to using people who are on probation to make certain movements if, changes need to be made. Obviously someone who has seniority who bid on a shift wouldn't be bumped from that shift, but we can utilize people who are on probation to make necessary changes. But again, the impact on the department administratively, and I think on everybody, is much less when you're dealing with maybe a handful of people versus everybody.
Thank you. I don't think we have any further questions on that.
Would we like to break for lunch now?
All right, we got them all in.
I think the question is, were those all the proposals the city was prepared to present today? And if so, I think, and the best use of time would be to break for lunch and just assume caucusing for the rest of the afternoon to prepare for next week, unless you would like to bring something new after lunch. Did we give you enough to work on?
And
Yes, I think
Or-
that's.
the city does have one additional proposal. I
Okay.
just stopped because of the time.
Oh, that's fine. I would continue with the last one
Okay.
and then we can go from there.
And the final proposal has been put in there. This has to do with the accrual of comp time. And the city is proposing that we reduce the maximum accrual rate from 480 hours to 240.
The quick question, I know you want to go from 40 to 240. Is there a buy down related to the 240, or 240 is the final bank and it is what it is?
Yeah, I think that's open for discussion.
Okay. And can you kind of touch on why the organization wants to go this direction and or the city or both?
Well, there's a financial aspect to people being able to accrue and have up to 480 hours. I think that I'm not really in a position to speak of. I think finance can. I know the other aspect from a departmental standpoint would be recognizing our current staffing and the amount of comp time that's being used and how we're filling those shifts. I think we're trying to just get something more controllable.
Okay, so does the city plan on kind of providing some of those numbers or at a later time or? I
Yeah,
mean,
so-
I guess I don't understand the full value that you'll be saving or where that comes in.
Yeah, so the financial perspective isn't material and,
Okay.
and we don't have numbers to share right now.
Okay.
It's my understanding. I mean, financially, I'll give you the logic and then we can talk numbers later. But if you accrue compensatory time now and take it later, then there is potential for pay rate changes between now and later. That is a small compensation
Sure.
change. But that's not driving the proposal. It's a consideration in harmony with the proposal.
Okay. Does the organization have any plans for implementing shift trade systems and or guarantees on vacation hours? Because as it stands right now, I could put in for a vacation for a year from now to go to Europe, and the day before I could be canceled. So even though you've approved it 365 days in advance, there's no guarantees that I can actually be off on that time. And so I think with the manpower and the administration, previous administration specifically, the way we are currently operating, I could see that it's very challenging manpower wise. But at the same time, that's a burden you're asking us to bear when it's a burden that when it's actually created by past administrations and, some of those kinds of things. So it'll definitely be a challenge for us to even get that low with our membership, because I'm representing 225 guys and this is a big issue for them. And some of those issues that they come up with are, well, what kind of guarantees do we have on vacation? Can we have a shift trade system? And so guys are using the comp time substantially to balance that out. And I know many people that their vacation time is not protected. So they use their comp time as vacation time and they use their vacation time as I just want to go fishing next week kind of deal. And it's not a big deal if I'm gone or not. So does the city have any, or the organization have any plans for trying to alleviate some of the stress? Because I get this is a big deal. It's a big deal for us. It's a big deal for you. But do you have any future ideas of how that would look? Because, that's a tough nut for us to crack, cutting it in half without any protections.
And bear with me.
Okay.
We don't have a shift trade mechanism now?
In the 26.
I thought we do.
It's conceptually approved, but there is no process for it. There's no forms for it. There's no means of doing it. So if I walked into my sergeant and said, how do I do this? They would be like, we have no idea.
Okay.
So, and then the protections on the annual side, many organizations will say, hey, if you are 90 days out and you put in vacation time, it's locked in, or, those kinds of protections. So, we definitely have to table this, but this is a huge issue for us. And I think that if the organization could come up with some ways to curb some of that maybe this is something we could have some mutual ground on.
And I think there could be some further discussions to be had because I would believe that there should be some level of protection from, if we're going to allow you to put that time in, some level of protection for that. So I think there's further discussion that could be had in that area.
Alrighty. Any other questions on the comp time?
My only question is in terms of process. So is the city agreeing to come back after a discussion with some of those protections? Or are we expecting a counter proposal from the union?
I think a counter proposal to hear what would work from the membership. And I'm just saying from your standpoint, you guys, because you live it and you work it, something that you might be able to bring forward to us that you think is amenable to work in that circumstance.
So just to clarify the problem, it's not so much the cost as it is the uncertainty and the inability to schedule and manage the people. Is that the primary concern? I guess I'm trying to get to the root of the problem so we can address it.
And I'll speak up one more. So my bandwidth's been so focused on fire union negotiations.
Well, shame on you.
I'm poorly
Don't tell
prepared
them
for
that,
this today.
Vic. That's not what they want to hear.
So one other dimension, could be financially. I mean, the unpredictability of who's coming in, it can precipitate more overtime. So that's another dimension that I'd need to study a little bit more thoroughly to understand, what's the unpredictability of using comp time. How is that influencing
Correct.
having to call people in for overtime.
So I guess from my perspective, the needing to understand the root cause of why this is a problem will help me solve how to maybe get on some better ground, mutual ground, so to speak. So I just want to make sure I have a good understanding of why, because, you know, in my limited perspective, I think it is a management problem that was created and that we're dealing with. And no offense to Chief Brooks, because he wasn't here when this storm was created. But at the same time, I don't feel like, without understanding the problem, that it's a burden that we should necessarily bear as members. But we definitely, you know, understand the problem as far as it's a problem, and coming up with a solution, we'll need to vet the root causes a little bit so we can get on better ground together.
Okay. And I could say from my perspective, I'm looking at it more from the departmental management side, but I do recognize that there is a financial aspect and burden to it as well. And, you know, sometimes, and I know Biff had talked about accruing comp time and then, you know, being paid out on at a higher rate. There's also with additional comp time, there's a compounding issue if someone is filling a vacancy that was created by comp time, and then they take comp time on top of that. There's a compounding issue that works with that as well. And so trying to limit that exposure, I think, not only from the departmental side, but from a finance side, is what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, so maybe if we get some numbers sometime in the future, Biff, related to what the buy downs have been historically, as far as how much money is being spent on the buy downs. And,
Yeah, I'll look into that for you.
That kind of stuff. And then we'll take under consideration the management side, you know, but you have to realize that this is I know we have the most amount afforded by law, and that's a big right that we've fought for over a long time. And we understand it's a big headache for the city, but it's probably one of the best benefits that we have. So it comes at a cost for us. So we'll have to try to work on that.
I'm going to try this again, just so I know who's doing what with this next. I believe you're asking the city to provide more information on the impacts of this proposal so that you are in a better position to do a counter. Got it?
Correct.
Thanks. Are we done, Chief?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Thank you. And for the record, we're going to conclude these negotiations for the day, and we will return next Wednesday.
But before we do, on a similar cleanup item, I believe on the CLA cleanup proposal, our first one, you were going to provide counter language on D4
Correct.
for our consideration.
Correct.
Okay. I'm also doing the laundry list down.
I appreciate it.
And just like Biff will be providing some additional research for to inform you all on any potential counter proposal on the last proposal we discussed. You'd be providing the research to support proposal C from the other agencies where you pulled the information.
Correct.
Cool. Okay. That was my last cleanup. So I lied. And then I believe we had a TA on city's proposal number 1, and we'll be printing that out. I want to confirm, but you said you had no objection, but I'd also.
Yeah, we're fine. We can do that.
Okay, perfect. Then we will be getting that to you before we officially, well, at some point today. Okay, now I'm completely done now, I promise.
Anyone else need to be completely done? All right. I will call this meeting closed. Thank you.